Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So we're going to continue on discussing a little bit about Yatindramata Dipika, which is the light on the school of Ramanuja. And last time we were going through the introduction of the book, and we were discussing about prajaksha. Prajaksha means direct sense perception or empirical knowledge. And now we're going to discuss the next type of pramana. Pramana means the type of method or proof of proving valid knowledge, or valid knowledge meaning, which is also called prama in Sanskrit. So in Sanskrit we have prama, which is our real knowledge or valid knowledge, and it's proved by these three methods of empirical sense perception, logical inference, right, or by authoritative statement, usually from the scriptures. Okay, so let's have a look at the text. So here it says, inference proceeds from the knowledge of vyapti or pervasion between vyapya, pervaded, and vyapaka, pervader. So what does that mean? In a case where fire pervades smoke, right? So fire is called vyapaka, vyapaka meaning the pervader, and smoke is called vyapya, or the pervaded. So you have a bunch of smoke, and inside of it you have fire. When there is a cognition, right, or when we recognize that smoke is pervaded by fire, right? So we have that experience that when we see smoke, if we clear away the smoke, we'll find that there's a fire that causes smoke, right? So when there's a cognition that smoke is pervaded by fire, that is the vyapaka, or the pervader, is more extensive than the vyapya, or that which is pervaded. The knowledge of vyapaka, the pervader, right, which is the fire, namely fire, is obtained as in inference, right? So the inference is wherever there's smoke, there is fire. That's a general statement, of inference, and it's given as an example. To ascertain the relationship of vyapti, which means pervasion, between the two phenomena, a single observation is not sufficient. So do we understand? So we were talking about observation previously, about pratyaksha, observing something and understanding from observing it something about it. And we had two types of observations. We had the determinate and the indeterminate observation. And the indeterminate observation comes from seeing something once, but we don't know what it is. But the determinate observation is we see something, we see the same thing, or the same type of thing many times, and therefore we know what it is because we've seen it before. So here again, with inference, with logical inference, we deduce. It's deductive reasoning. We deduce from seeing something happen before that it's happening again. We make that assumption. So we've seen that there is smoke, and then we've seen that the cause of the smoke is the fire, and therefore when we see some more smoke, we understand that there's a fire that's causing that smoke too, because we had that previous experience of seeing smoke that was caused by fire. So what he's saying is a single observation is not sufficient for inference. We can't infer something if we don't have a baseline to infer it from. So we have this idea that wherever there's smoke, there's fire. So when there's smoke, there's fire that causes the smoke. So therefore, whenever we see smoke, we think there's a fire that caused it. Therefore, Vishishtadvaita emphasizes the need for repeated observation to establish the universal pervasion beyond doubt. And this is very much like the scientific method. The scientific method, there's a hypothesis, right? People have an idea that something may be true. They set up an experiment, and the results of the experiment, if they can be reproduced many times, prove the hypothesis. And if they cannot be reproduced many times, they don't prove the hypothesis, and you have to adjust the hypothesis. That is the scientific method. So similarly, this inference is also logical or scientific or rational, right? It's a way of deducing the truth by our which we get when we get observation, which is indeterminate, let's say. So, for instance, when we see the smoke, somebody asks, "Is there fire there?" Well, we don't know; it's sort of indeterminate, but we can deduce because we've seen that the smoke was pervaded by fire in the past. We can deduce that there is. So, by inference, we can say there is fire. So, what he's saying here is there has to be repeated observation of a certain thing to infer that the next observation of it, or the present observation of it that we have, conforms to the rule that we saw before. The syllogism is not restricted to 5 members only. Syllogism is the way of stating the argument. Usually has these 5 members, five things involved there. So in some cases, a 3-membered syllogism, right, serves the purpose, and in other cases, even a 2-membered syllogism is recognized as sufficient. So upamana in Sanskrit, there's a word upamana. It means comparison, and artapati, postulation, right, are brought under anumana, right, since they depend upon the knowledge of vyapti. Vyapti means, again, right, pervasion, right? So we have these 2 words here. Now, these are also in some systems, upamana or comparison and artapati or postulation, right, are considered separate pramanas. They're considered separate methods of proof. But in Vishishtadvaita, comparison and postulation, right, upamana and artapati, are considered part of anumana. So anumana includes them, right? Okay. So basically, that's all we have to say right now about anumana. In the text, there'll be a little bit more about it, but it really means deducing from previous experience, right, and from other means of knowing, right, logically assuming that there is the same thing going on that happened before. So Shabda. Now we come to Shabda. Shabda means verbal or scriptural testimony, and it really means the testimony of an authority. So there might be an authority on a particular thing, and usually that's a scripture when we're talking about transcendental subjects. So what does transcendental mean? Transcendental means beyond material, beyond empirical. It cannot be measured by our mundane senses, but it is beyond those senses. So if it's beyond the senses, beyond being measured by the senses, then it's what we call it transcendental, right? So something which is transcendental we're unable to measure it with projection or sense perception, and even anumana may fail to explain it. So therefore, we have to accept on subjects that are beyond empirical or rational thought, we have to accept the statement of an authority. The greatest authority, of course, is the Shruti or the Vedas in the Vedantic system. So verbal or scriptural testimony is recognized as a special source of knowledge, right? Because it deals with things that we cannot specifically figure out right? With Pratyeka and Anumana. However, if we can understand something by Pratyeka or Anumana, then we don't need to rely upon verbal testimony, Shabda, or scriptural testimony. Right? If I can see, right, if I touch the fire and I burn my hand, right, that's direct sense perception. I don't need a scripture to tell me that fire is hot and it will burn me. I can experience that directly. Similarly, the same thing with smoke and fire. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay, I don't need scripture to tell me that. Again, I've experienced that on many occasions, and therefore I hold it to be true. It's logical, and I can deduce it. So it can be understood by Pratyeka, it can be understood by Anumana. So if something can be understood by Pratyeka and Anumana, then there's no need to try to explain it by finding some scriptural text that says, right? So scriptural testimony alone can claim the position of the authoritative means of knowledge with regard to Brahman. Brahman is spirit. Brahman is beyond matter. So Brahman is spirit, is the supreme spirit. And therefore, because Brahman is spirit, which is beyond matter, which is beyond empiricism, which is beyond rational thought, right? Therefore, it can only be understood. It can only really be understood by Shabda, which never falls within the range of Pratyeka and Anumana, right? So it's outside of those other two. So a statement is authoritative when it is uttered by a trustworthy person, or in this case, the greatest statements with the greatest authority are Shruti, or the Vedas, or the Upanishads. When it is free from errors due to defects of sense organs, or when its meaning is not contradicted by another cognition, right? The Vedas are authoritative in toto, or completely. They're completely authoritative. The two sections of the Vedas, and the Vedas are apurusheya, they are unauthored. So there are some defects that come in. There are some defects that come in when a text is authored. There's a possibility, because the author is fallible, is a fallible person. The author can make mistakes, and therefore there can be some errors that creep in. Whereas the Vedas, because they're unauthored, there's no mistakes by the author. So we avoid that. The Vedas are authoritative in toto. The two sections of the Vedas are called Karmakanda and Jnanakanda. So the Jnanakanda section is basically the Upanishads, which deal with the philosophy in the Vedas, the Vedanta. The Karmakanda is everything else. The Samhitas, which are the prayers, and the hymns, which are used in the ceremonies and the sacrifices. The Brahmanas, which are the ritual manuals to tell how to use the hymns and the sacrifices. And the Aranyakas also are sometimes used in different ceremonies and different meditations. So the Upanishads really deal with the philosophy part of the Vedas, the Jnanakanda, the knowledge part, and the Karmakanda. And as we understood before, Vishveshwadvaita accepts the Karmakanda, accepts the Jnanakanda. It accepts the Purva Mimamsa, right? The system of karma, of Vedic karmas, also accepts that after going through and understanding the Vedic karmas, right, that one will come to a point where he'll think about things which are beyond, which are transcendental to this material world. We'll think about Brahman, and the inquiry into Brahman, into spirit, comes after the inquiry into the rituals, which will give us material benefits like offspring and riches and whatever, and life in the heaven, in the Swarga, or heaven. So these two sections, according to Vishveshwadvaita, the two sections of Karmakanda and Jnanakanda do not contradict each other. Now, whereas Adi Shankaracharya, right, his idea is that the Karmakanda should be totally rejected, and only the Jnanakanda, only the Upanishads are important, because for him, his idea is that liberation, which is the Purushartha, the fourth Purushartha, moksha, getting free from this world of samsara, right, is attained only by knowledge. So they have a statement, jnanat moksha. So from knowledge comes liberation, like that. He says that in the Gita, when Krishna says to abandon all varieties of religion, what Krishna is saying to give up all types of work and just take sannyas, just be completely renounced, give up all sorts of work, and just concentrate on studying of the scriptures of jnana, and that is the way to liberation. So Shankara rejects the Karmakanda section of the Vedas. Ramanuja doesn't reject it, but he says after we study it, after we deal with it, then the next section is the Upasana Kanda or the Jnana Kanda, right, which deals with the worship of God or the knowledge of Brahman. So the earlier sections, or the Karmakanda, treats the various modes of Upasana or worship, and the latter section is devoted to Brahman, the understanding of Brahman, the object of the worship. Hence, both Kandas, both parts of the Vedas, constitute one homogeneous subject. Unlike the Mimamsa school, when he says Mimamsa school, he means, remember, Mimamsa means deliberation. So the Purva Mimamsa, or the first deliberation, is about karma, is about the Vedic rites, right? So unlike the Purva Mimamsa school, where validity of the verbal statement is restricted to those Vedic texts which have for their scope what is yet to be accomplished, sadhya, right? What is to be accomplished is called sadhya. So unlike the Purva Mimamsa school or the Karmakanda school, where the validity of a verbal statement is restricted to those Vedic texts that have for their scope what is yet to be accomplished, right? So in other words, the Vedic texts tell us how to accomplish different aims by doing different sacrifices and rituals. In Vishishtadvaita, the Vedic texts, which denote Brahman, or the transcendent Lord, or the Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana, are an existent reality, or siddha, a perfection, right, are also equally authoritative, right? So in the Purvamamsa or the Karmakanda school, they really only talk about the statements that are given in the Vedas that talk about attaining different material benefits. Whereas in the Uttaramamsa, in the Vedanta, in the Upanishads, right, they talk about the reality of the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana. They talk about Brahman, or spiritual, or the Supreme Spirit, right? And that is, and they are equally, these statements are equally accepted. They're equally accepted because we said that the Vedas are accepted. So the statements in all the Vedas are accepted. So not just in the Upanishads, but in all the Vedas. So the Pancharatra Agama and the Vaikhanasa Agama, which are the two agamas or tantras or methods of worship, right, which are adopted by Vaishnavas, right, which do not contradict the Vedas. It's very important, this statement, which do not contradict the Vedas, are authoritative in toto according to this system. So in the Vishishtadvaita system, unlike, again, Shankara, who doesn't like the Pancharatra Agama, who says it shouldn't be accepted. But according to Ramanuja, according to Vishishtadvaita, Vaikhanasa and Pancharatra Agamas are accepted if they do not contradict what is stated in the Upanishads or the Vedas, right? So the Vedas are the topmost Shabda Pramana, the topmost proof, authoritative scriptural proof comes from the Vedas, right? And Vedic proof always outclasses any proof that comes in Pancharatra Agama, Vaikhanasa Agama, or any other scripture, right? Or from any other person, right? So now continuing on, we have what's called prameya. Prameya means valid knowledge. So prama is reality or truth, and prameya means valid knowledge about the truth. So the object of valid knowledge is divided into two main categories, that is dravya and adravya. So we have substances and we have non-substances. So we have physical substances, something which is a substance, which can be measured, and we have something which is not a non-substance. So dravya, the substance, is not only the material cause, but also serves as the locus of change, or the place of change. There are 6 dravyas. According to the Vishishtadvaita system, there are 6 substances. They are prakriti, which means material nature, kala meaning time, dharma adbhuta jnana, which we talked about right before, right? Nitya vibhuti, which means the spiritual world, jiva and ishvara. So these are substances. These are dravyas, right? So we've got prakriti meaning the material nature, kala meaning time, dharma adbhuta jnana means the once again it means the perception, correct perception, the correct knowledge that comes from the correct perception. Nitya vibhuti, the supreme abode, the jiva, which is the atma, the individual atma, and ishvara. So adravya, or the non-substances, which is an attribute. So what is not a substance is an attribute, is always dependent upon a dravya. Okay, so what does that mean? It means like, if we have a brown cow, right? The cow is the substance. The cow is the thing. The fact that the cow is colored brown, right? That is an attribute of the cow. So that brownness, right, depends upon. You can't have a brown cow unless you have a cow. First of all, you have to have a cow, and that cow can be brown or white or black. In this case, we have a brown one. So the brownness is dependent upon the substance. The brownness is the attribute. The attribute is dependent upon the substance. So while adravya, which is an attribute, is always dependent upon the dravya. So the attribute is always dependent upon the substance. While adravya, or the attribute, as an attribute is subject to change, right? So we could, if we have a brown cow, we could paint it a different color, and it becomes a white cow. We paint it with white paint. So attributes can change. Attributes can certainly change, right? That's not a very good example, but anyway. So like you have a brown wall, you can paint it, it becomes white. Okay. The dravya, right, as a substantive element, does not undergo any change. So the attributes can change of a thing, but the essence of a thing doesn't change. A characteristic feature of Vishishtadvaita is that adravya, or attribute, is sometimes viewed as both substance and attribute. Okay? So for instance, though prabha meaning light is an attribute of an effulgent object. So if you have an effulgent object like the sun or the moon or fire, right, it serves also as a substance. So light is considered not only to be an attribute, but also a substance, since it is subject to contraction and diffusion and possesses color as an attribute, right? So light can be diffused through a crystal, let's say, through a prism, and you get different colors coming out. So those colors are attributes of the original light, of the original white light. So therefore, something which has attributes has to be considered a substance, right? So at the same time, since light is also an attribute of a fiery object, let's say like the sun or the moon or fire, a light-producing object, it's also considered an attribute of those things. So it's considered an attribute. It's also considered a substance because it has attributes. From the absolute standpoint, Ishvara, or God, is the only dravya, or the only substance, and the world of matter and selves are his attributes. Ishvara and jiva, or God and the soul, right, viewed as substantive elements, right, are not subject to modifications. So God doesn't change. God is always God, and he's always the same. The jiva also doesn't change, right? It's also, because it's considered to be spiritual also, right? It also doesn't change. So as a substance, they don't change. While prakriti, right, this material universe undergoes change, right? There's creation, there's maintenance, there's destruction, there's recreation. There's so many different things that happen in Prakriti. Kala changes. We have different types of kala. We have past, present, future. We have different types of time. Time is wasted. Time goes on. Dharma Bhuta Jnana undergoes modifications, right? This is the knowledge that we perceive by the other methods of pramana. And Nitya Vibhuti, which is the spiritual world, apparently, as attributive elements undergo change. So according to Vishishtadvaita, even the Nitya Vibhuti undergoes some changes, the spiritual world. The adravyas are 10. So we're talking about attributes. They're categorized here as 10. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, which are qualities of Prakriti, right? What are they? Sattva means goodness, passion, and ignorance. Or we can say, basically we could just say goodness, passion, ignorance. Sound, touch, color, taste, and smell are the qualities of the five bhutas, or the five indriyas, the five senses, and which come from the five mahabhutas, which are earth, water, fire, air, and ether, five elements. Yeah, like akasha, etc. Akasha meaning space or ether. Samyoga. So we have sattva, rajas, tamas. We have sound, touch, color, taste, and smell. Right? So we have those five, that's 8. And we have samyoga, which means conjunction, is the external relation between these substances. Right? So there's a relationship between the substances. Right? Sort of like sandhi in grammar, how things connect together. Shakti, or potency, as the affecting agent of causation in all causal substances. So Shakti may be like a catalyst, that or potency is a catalyst for change, right? So that's also one of the adravyas. So continuing on, Prakriti. Now to understand about Prakriti. Prakriti, or the material world, the material nature, characterized by the 3 gunas. What are they again? The three modes of nature, goodness, passion, ignorance, constitute the stuff out of which the universe evolves. Right? So Prakriti evolves into the universe. And that system of evolution follows very much the Sankhya school of evolution. So in Vishishtadvaita, it is the abode of the individual self in mundane existence. So the individual self, or the Atman, right, when he's covered by illusion and he's here in this material world, it's called a Bada Jiva, a bound Jiva, in samsara, exists in Prakriti. He exists here in this material universe. It is called Mula Prakriti. Mula means root. So Mula Prakriti, since it is the primordial cause of the cosmos. So we can say that this cosmos is the Prakriti. Before it evolved, before the creation, before it all became all the different things that we see today, like that, we call it Mula Prakriti, or the root of material nature. Since it is the primordial cause of the cosmos, it is known as Akash, right? Akash meaning ether or space, as it is eternal in spite of its manifold changes and modifications. Okay, so it's considered eternal, even though it changes. It changes its form, it evolves, it goes through different changes. It is termed as avyakta, as it is very subtle. It is very subtle in its causal state. So its original causal state was very subtle. Now it's very gross. So it is called avidya. Avidya means ignorance, as it is opposed to the knowledge of reality. So the idea of prakriti somehow or other obscures the reality of God and of the soul, like that. Of course, God isn't covered by ignorance, but the soul is covered by this ignorance, right? Which is a part of prakriti. Naturally comes with prakriti, and is known as Maya. as it is the cause of of cosmic wonders. So imagine that the soul is covered by this Maya, or this, what does Maya mean? Maya. That Ma means not, Ya means that. That which is not, or illusion, is Maya. Right. So it can also be called Maya, it can also be called avidya. A lot of times in Vishishtadvaita, we don't say Maya, but we say avidya, ignorance. It means a lack of knowledge, just a lack of knowledge, or the knowledge is obscured in some way. Now imagine that God is the sun, and you are just like you're on the planet Earth, and you're looking up, and there's a cloud in between. So that cloud covers you. It doesn't cover God. It covers God in the sense that it obstructs your view of God, right? But it doesn't. The sun is never really covered. It's really you that is covered. It's the cloud. The cloud covers you. So somehow or other, this is called avidya, or ignorance. So when the matter is in an extremely latent state, without distinction of name and form, before it evolves, right, it is known as pralaya, right? And pralaya also, or just the word laya also, pralaya means, or laya means, we tend to call it as dissolution or destruction of the universe, right? Now, the Vedic idea of time is that it is cyclical, and that there will be a creation and destruction periodically. It will go on like that. And after a creation, there'll be an evolution, and then after the evolution, there'll be a dissolution, and again, there'll be another creation. From Prakriti, right, or material nature, known as tamas, is the beginning of evolution. Then Mahat means a conglomeration, like the Mula Prakriti. From Mula Prakriti, the original type of Prakriti, comes Mahat. Mahat appears in three states, the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, right? Mahat evolves into Ahankar. Ahankar means ego, false ego. With the same three states, Sattvic Ahankar, which is called Vaikarika, Rajasika Ahankar, Taijasa, and Tamas Ahankar, called Bhutadi, right? So these are three types of Ahankar, three types of ego, right? When the Sattvic Ahankar, aided by the Rajasa Ahankar, right, proceed, the 11 senses come. Now, this is all Sankhya theory. This is all the theory of creation coming from Sankhya, the Sankhya school, which is accepted by Vishishtadvaita as the way the universe evolves. From Sattvic Ahankar, aided by Rajasic Ahankar, proceed the 11 senses, 5 Kamindriyas. Kamindriyas are the working senses, right? And the 5 Gyanindriyas, the knowledge acquiring senses, and the manas, the mind. So they all come out of the Sattvic Ahankar and the Rajasic Ahankar combined. From the Tamasic Ahankar, aided by Taijasa. Taijasa means the Rajasic Ahankar. So from the Rajasic and Tamasic, right, Ahankar, arise the 5 gross elements of, Bhumir, Nalo, Vayu, Kam, right? Akash, ether, earth, water, fire, air, ether, right? Through the media of the 5 tanmatras. Now, a tanmatra, right, is the attribute of these elements. So sound, touch, color, taste or savor, and odor, smell. The entire process of cosmic evolution is nothing but change of states, right? So what was there in the beginning is the same as what's there in the end, but it changes its states. It evolves. It goes through different changes. This is called parinamavad, right? The reality of the material world and how it changes. In toto, in whole, the material world is always there, is always in some form, but it changes. It goes through changes, and these changes are cyclical. The distinction between cause and effect is not real. The distinction between cause and effect is not real because the cause is always present in the effect. If we see an effect, we can understand the cause, right? A particular anterior, right? Anterior means previous. particular previous state, right, is called cause, and a particular posterior, right, or after state is called the effect. So the state which comes before, right, the Mula Prakriti state of Prakriti, right, or we can say when it is considered to be Mahat, from Prakriti it becomes Mahat, right? This is an anterior state or a previous state, right? So we call that the cause, right? So there's a causal state of Prakriti, and then there's an effect state of Prakriti, which we see around us today, right? So the anterior state is called cause, and the particular posterior state is called the effect, right? So the previous state is the cause. After the cause comes the effect. Every effect connotes a pre-existing cause. So if there's an effect, if we observe an effect, it means there is a cause for it. The doctrine of Satkaryavad or Parinamavad, right? So I've been mentioning Parinamavad, affirms that non-difference of the cause and effect, right? So within the effect is the cause, right? So that is called Parinamavad. It's also called Satkaryavad. Satkaryavad means the belief that this is a real universe, that the universe is real. Sat means eternal, right? Karya is made eternal, is eternal, is real. Okay, so that's about Prakriti. Now continuing on about Kala. Kala meaning time. Kala, or time, is eternal, and it's also all pervasive. It's also all pervasive. Unlike Prakriti, it is devoid of three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. So there's no such thing as sattvic time, rajasic time, or tamasic time. It's not affected by, it doesn't have the attributes of Prakriti, right? It is eternal and it's all pervasive. Time is as effect, right, which we experience in our ordinary life, is changing and non-eternal. Months and years according to human and divine standards. So there are these different divisions of time, right? But time as we know it is as we experience in ordinary life, is changing and is non-eternal. But time is actually eternal and all pervasive. So there's months, years according to human, according to divine calculations, the 4 yugas, the birth of the manus, etc. And the nitya, daily or eternal, and the naimitika, occasional, and the prakrita, dissolutions, the dissolutions of matter, of the universe, are dependent on time. So time, according to time, all these different things occur, right? The evolution of the universe, etc., etc., and the birth of manus, the 4 ages, the months, the years of human and divine calculations, right? It serves as an instrument in the cosmic functions of Ishvara. So the Lord wants the universe to function. In order for it to function, there has to be time. Time makes everything function. So even in the Gita, Krishna also says, time I am, right? So it's a function of the Supreme Lord that makes the universe run. Though time has independence in Lila Vibhuti, right, in this material world, it has no independent status in Nitya Vibhuti. In the eternal spiritual world, it has no independent status. But in the material world, it has an independent status. It is a dravya, right? It has an independent status from the Lord. But in the supreme realm, it has no independent status. So, Nitya Vibhuti. Now we're talking about the spiritual world, right? Because we talked about the material world, right? Prakriti, we talked about time. Now we're going to talk about the spiritual world. So, Nitya Vibhuti is an immaterial, infinite domain. So, immaterial, it's spiritual, it's infinite domain beyond Prakriti, beyond material things, and beyond the gunas, beyond sattva, rajas, and tamas. It's beyond that. Right? It is self-luminous, right? So here in this material world, we have certain sources of luminosity, certain sources of light, like the sun, the moon, and fire. But there, we don't need that because everything is self-luminous and is characterized by what is known as Shuddha Sattva. Shuddha Sattva means that it's different from the sattva of the 3 gunas. So the 3 gunas have goodness, passion, ignorance. So there is this Shuddha means completely pure, pure goodness. There is pure goodness. There is Shuddha Sattva, which is the stuff of Nitya Vibhuti, the eternal realm of the Supreme Lord, is completely made of it's not made of prakriti, it's not made of material energy, right? It's spiritual energy, and that spiritual energy is characterized by the attribute of being completely pure stuff that it's made out of, called Shuddha Sattva. It is known by the different names of Paramapada. So we call it Paramapada, or it means the supreme destination or the supreme feet of the Lord, right? Tripad Vibhuti. Vibhuti means the like an opulence of the Lord, right? There's two opulences. There's the Ekpad Vibhuti and the Tripad Vibhuti. Tripad means three parts. Ekpad means one part. So if we conceive of the whole of creation as being one thing, right? 3/4 of it is the spiritual world, and 1/4 of it is the material world. The 3/4, of course, is, as it said here, is infinite. So we can't really think of it in real mathematical terms as being 3/4 and 1/4, but we can consider the spiritual world to be much, much greater than the material world. So it is known by the different names of Paramapada, Tripad Vibhuti, Anandaloka. Anandaloka, loka means in English or in Latin, we say locus, or the place. Loka is a place. The place of bliss. Ananda means bliss, right? Of eternal bliss. Whereas the place, this material world is a place of suffering, right? Etc. So these are different names for it. Vaikunta, right? Vaikunta means without anxiety, right? The city of God is situated within the realm of Nitya Vibhuti. So within Nitya Vibhuti, there are different things going on there. There's a place called Vaikunta, which is considered to be the city of God. It is the stuff out of which the bodies of Ishvara, the eternals, and the liberated selves are made. Right? So this is called, so Nitya Vibhuti, or the Shuddha Sattva, is like the stuff which everything is made out of there. It is the means for the enjoyment of the liberated selves. Right? So the 5 Shaktis of Sarva, Nivritti, Vishva, Purusha, and Parameshtin, and the 6 attributes of Jnana Shakti, Bala, Aishwarya, Virya, and Tejas manifest in this eternal domain of Shuddha Sattva. So that we'll talk about those a little bit later, okay? So these are different powers and different attributes. Though it is beyond Prakriti, or the material nature, right? It is capable of descending and permeating the consecrated images, or archa, in sacred places. So the Supreme Lord is there in Sri Vaikuntham, in Paramapada, in the Nitya Vibhuti, but still he and the eternally liberated or eternally free souls, they're also able to descend and to permeate consecrated images, or archa avatar, right? Avatar, remember, means avatarti, means he descends, right? In different sacred places in this world. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about Dharmadvita Jnana. The conception of Dharmadvita Jnana has already been indicated in dealing with the psychology of perception, right? Remember we were talking about the pramana. The first pramana is perception, or empirical sense perception, right? It is eternal and all-pervasive in respect to Ishvara and the jivas, right? It is not only self-illuminating, but what is consciousness is self-illuminating, right? If I'm conscious, then I also understand, that also illuminates myself. I know that I exist, which we discussed before. It is not only self-illuminating, but is also of the nature of both dravya, a substance, and guna, an attribute, right? Substance and attribute. Dravya is that which is the substratum of states, right? So, and guna depends upon dravya, which you already discussed, that the guna, or the attribute, depends upon the substance. Dharma Bhutajnana is conceived as a dravya, as a substance, since it is the substratum of change through its states of expansion and contraction. So knowledge, right, the knowledge that we have, right, can change in this material world. It can expand and contract in the sense that we can be covered by avidya or ignorance, and that means that our knowledge is considered contracted. So, and as a guna, it's also considered, Dharma Bhutajnana is also considered not just a substance, but it's also considered an attribute, since it adheres in a substance like the jiva or Ishvara, right? So Ishvara has Dharma Bhutajnana, he has full knowledge, and the jiva in liberation has full knowledge, but the jiva in this material world has the attribute of contracted knowledge, right? So because the Ishvara and jiva have this attribute of knowledge, right? Brahman actually is Sat Chit Ananda. Chit means knowledge, it means consciousness. So this Chit is also an attribute. It's also a substance, it's also an attribute, right? So in the sense that God always has knowledge, the jivas have expansive knowledge in liberation and have contracted knowledge in this material world. Terms such as mati, pragya, samvit, shemushi, etc. are synonyms for Dharma Abhutajnana. So these are all just other terms which mean Dharma Abhutajnana. Just think jnana or consciousness, chit. All mental states are reduced to consciousness, inasmuch as jnana is the attribute as well as the essence of the individual self. Let me repeat that. The individual self, the essence of the individual self is jnana, right? Is jnana or knowledge or consciousness. There is no feeling that is not more or less mixed by thinking, no volition, right, that is not influenced by thought. So we have, there's no feeling without thinking, right? There's no volition or willing that is not influenced by thought. So we don't do anything. These are the system: thinking, feeling, willing, or feeling, thinking, willing, feeling, willing, thinking, like that. They all go together. The consciousness is, as it were, an ocean which has the multifarious ripples of mental life. Hence, pratyaksha, or empirical sense perception, anumana, logical inference, shabda, authoritative statement, mainly from the Vedas or the scriptures, instincts, desires, and passions are but various phases of Dhamma Bhutajnana, or our knowledge or consciousness. It embraces the paths of karma, jnana, and bhakti, right? So our consciousness, we can take to these different paths, and constitutes the root of religious experience. So these different paths, when we take to the path of karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, it is because of our dharma adhuta jnana, because of our consciousness, and all of these other things which were mentioned before, right? And that is the root of our religious practice or our religious experience. Finally, when the religious experience develops into firm meditation, right, which is compared to the uninterrupted flow of oil or dhyana meditation or deep samadhi meditation, right, it becomes the means of realizing the beatific form of the divine, right? So the method of realizing is to meditate upon the form of the Supreme, right? And this religious experience that from karma jnana and bhakti yoga ultimately will end up giving us that full uninterrupted meditation upon the Supreme. And this is part of moksha. This is part of liberation. Thus, the religious consummation is absolutely dependent on the perfect manifestation of Dharma Bhutajnana. So ultimately, everything is a manifestation of this consciousness, a perfect consciousness. The spiritual discipline in the path to perfection begins with karma yoga, which is action without any regard for the fruits, illumined by true knowledge of the individual self and the highest self and the Supreme. So once we know what is the self, once we know what is the supreme, and we engage in action, and we offer the fruits of that action to the supreme, that is considered to be karma yoga. The discipline of karma yoga destroys impurities in the mind and generates jnana or knowledge, right? And through it, and directly, either through the karma yoga or directly, right, through the jnana, right, prepares the mind for bhakti. So karma, right, and jnana, first of all, karma and jnana help to prepare the mind and prepare the self for bhakti or devotion to God, devotion, right? And remember that the ultimate form of devotion here is going to be the complete and absolute 100% meditation upon the Lord, right? And consciousness of the Lord, right? Which is considered to be like an uninterrupted flow of oil, firm meditation, like that, a total consciousness of the Lord. The discipline of karma yoga, expressed the impurities of the mind, generates jnana, and through it or directly prepares the mind for bhakti or devotion. Jnana yoga is meditation upon the individual self. Right. So we had, first of all, karma yoga. We explained what karma yoga was. Disinterested in the fruits, dispassionate work for the supreme, giving up the results of action. And jnana yoga is meditation upon the individual self, right? As distinct from prakriti, to understand the soul as distinct from the body and its effects. After realizing the true nature from the instructions of a preceptor. So jnana yoga, again, involves that a preceptor or a teacher or a guru is going to explain to somebody how to meditate upon the self as distinct from the body and its effects in material nature. Bhakti Yoga is continuous stream of remembrance of Ishvara, again, which is like an uninterrupted, like the continual flow of oil from one vessel to another, right? So everything in Bhakti Yoga, all the different types of Bhakti that we know about, the Navada Bhakti, the different types of Bhakti, they're meant to bring about an uninterrupted, continual meditation upon the Lord, or consciousness of the Lord, Sriman Narayana. And like the continual flow of oil poured from one vessel to another, and is characterized by the eightfold limbs. So in yoga, in the yoga system of Patanjali, they have these Astanga yoga. So there are 8 limbs to this yoga, which are yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So these are the different limbs of yoga, right? So these can be understood as being part also of Bhakti Yoga, like that. So we have yama and niyama dealing with different rules and regulations. Yama are do's, niyama means don'ts, asana, how to sit, pranayama, how to control the breath, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, how to fix the mind on the supreme, like that, in different stages. Such steady remembrance, which is of the same character as intuition, results only from the sevenfold disciplines, sadhana saptaka, of viveka, discrimination, right? So these are the 7 aspects of sadhana, right? Viveka, which means discrimination. Vimoka, mental detachment. Obviously, we discriminate as to what is spiritual, what is material, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, etc., like that. And vimoka, mental detachment. We have to be mentally detached from material things, right? Abhyasa, constant practice. So it involves practice. Kriya, good action. Kalyana, virtuous conduct, right? Anavasada, or cheerfulness, right, which naturally will occur after we do all these things. Anudarsha, or non-exaltation, right? Being cheerful, but not being too exalted. Non-exaltation means not going overboard with our emotions and everything like that, being carried away by emotions in a bad way. So Bhakti Yoga is the classical pathway to liberation. It is a classical pathway to liberation taught in the Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and then Bhakti Yoga, all taught in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Upanishads, and in all the other scriptures as well. These are taught. So it's a classical pathway to liberation, but there is an alternative path to release for those who find it difficult to practice the austere disciplines of the sadhana saptika, the 7 sadhanas, and the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 different forms of parts of yoga, which we just discussed, and who are not qualified to receive instruction in the Veda and the Upanishads. So, according to the Smriti Shastras, some of the Smriti writers, people who are born either female or in a lower caste, in the lowest caste or the lowest class in Vedic society, the Shudras, were not eligible to be instructed in the Veda, right, which is the most important pramana, right, remember? And therefore, they were not able to follow these hard, austere disciplines of sadhana saptika or Ashtanga Yoga, right? So these people, there's another system for those persons, or even for persons who find it difficult to perform this sadhana saptika and Ashtanga Yoga, which has been described. But those are definitely processes which can be followed by people who are qualified for those things. So this may be followed by anyone. So what is it? This is another system which can be followed by anyone, irrespective of his or her limitations, physical, mental, or social. So we may have some different limitations. This path is called, right? This is known as property. Property means sharanagati, it means surrender. Surrender. The heart of property is absolute. The essence of it is the absolute self-surrender with the firm faith in the saving grace of Ishvara, or God. So having this mahavishvasha or supreme faith or conviction that God will save one if one simply surrenders to God. This is known as property. And this is open to everybody, irregardless of their qualification, irregardless of their social, mental, physical, status, right? Irregardless of gender, irregardless of any material aspect, right? Not just human beings, also animals, any sentient being can take to property. The heart of property is absolute self-surrender with the firm faith in the saving grace of Ishvara. The main characteristics of property are to conceive what is in conformity with the will of God, right, which is called Anukulyasya Sankalpa. This verse, Anukulyasya Sankalpa, Pratikulyasya Varjana, comes from Lakshmi Tantra, right, which is one of the Pancharatra arguments, right? But this process of property actually comes from one of the 32 Upanishadic vidyas. Some people say 32 or 33 methods given in the Upanishads. So it also has Vedic backing, this idea of property, right? It's not just something which comes from the Bhagavad Gita or comes from, the Mahabharata or some Purana. It has got Vedic backing in the Upanishads, right? Which is most important, remember, because it's important to have the topmost Shruti Pramana or proof for a particular process or for anything, right? So the main characteristics of property are, number one, to conceive what is in conformity with the will of God, which is called Anukulyasya Sankalpa, to do what God wills, right? Rejection of what is disagreeable to him, right? Anukulyasya Sankalpa, Pratikulyasya Varjana, giving up what is disagreeable to him, to the Supreme Lord. Mahavishvasha, having firm faith that he will save, and seek protection alone as a protector, Gopitritva Varnam, right? And to surrender oneself to him with all meekness, right? So karpanyam, and to surrender to him with all meekness. So these are the main characteristics of property, right? These are not prerequisites according to the Tengai school, but they are post-requisites. They are things that come about as we surrender, as we practice property. Some people, like some people in the Wadagalai school, the Northern school, they may consider these to be prerequisites. Okay, but in any case, they're attributes. They're attributes of property, right? A single act of self-surrender, in all sincerity, is sufficient to bring about release at once, right? A single act of property or self-surrender to the Lord, right, in all sincerity, is sufficient to bring about release at once. Okay, so that's enough about that. So we can continue with an explanation about the jiva, the jivatma. Like Ishvara, like God, the jiva is of the nature of consciousness and possesses, right, dharma bhuta jnana, which means the knowledge of his, he possesses knowledge, let's say, dharma bhuta jnana, as an inseparable attribute, right? When we are of the nature of consciousness or knowledge, then we also possess knowledge. So it's also the substance of the jiva and its attribute, right? It is real. The jiva is real, right? The individual souls are not. They're not illusion. It's not an illusion that they exist. They actually do exist. They're real. They're eternal, and they're unborn. It is distinct from the body, the sense organs, the mind, and vital airs, though the individual self is a mode of Brahman, of the supreme Brahman, or Ishvara, or God, right? An attribute, a mode of Brahman means an attribute of God, right? Is essentially of the same nature as God. It's essentially of the same nature as God, just like a spark is of the same hot nature, light nature as a fire. It is actually distinct. It is distinct from the Supreme Ishvara, from Brahman, right? The Atma. So it's actually distinct. 4, it is monadic in size. So it is what we call vibhinamsa. It is very, very tiny in size and resides in a separate body. So we all have these separate bodies. And there's an Atma that pervades and that particular body. There's a jiva, or a soul that pervades that body. It is an agent. It's an agent means that it can do things. It's a karta. It's a doer, right? An enjoyer. It can enjoy. It can enjoy and suffer in this material world. The embodied self and the body, right? So it is an agent, the enjoyer, the embodied. It's an agent, the enjoyer, the embodied self here in this material world, and the body, embodied self and the body. So it can use those things, and it can enjoy through those things, through the self and the body. It is the embodied self with regard to its physical body. It is the body in regard to Ishvara. So it is, the jiva is the embodied self inside the physical body in this world, but is also considered to be the body of Ishvara, the body of Ishvara, the body of God. It is not only sentient, but it is also of the essence of Ananda. So not only it has this knowledge or this consciousness, right, as its essence and as its attribute, but it's also of the essence of bliss, of Ananda. Samsara, or the repeated cycle of birth, death, disease, and old age, right, going round and round and round, and rebirth, right, is due to avidya, is due to ignorance, that contraction of knowledge, right, which occurs because of prakriti, the contact of the jiva with prakriti, right? Samsara is due to avidya, which is of the nature of karma. Karma meaning the reactions to actions that we have, accumulated by the jiva in its previous births. So there is a continuity in this material world of birth and death and rebirth, like that, a cycle. And because of actions that have happened in previous births and reactions from those things, which is called karma, right? Because of that type of karma, there is avidya, or ignorance of of the true nature of the soul and of God, which covers the living being or the particular soul, the particular jivatman. In this condition, jnana and ananda are obscured. So in the Bada Jiva's, the bound Jiva's condition in this material world, his full knowledge and his bliss are obscured. So there may be some knowledge, there may be some bliss, but in general, the full knowledge and bliss of the Jiva is obscured by this condition, but fully manifest in a state of liberation. What does that mean? It means that ananda or bliss is fully manifest. Jnana is fully manifest. So one has supreme bliss and supreme knowledge, in complete bliss and complete knowledge in the state of liberation. Right? In spite of its monadic size, in spite of its size, the jiva, tiny size, the jiva can contact the ends of space through its attributive knowledge. So, meaning the liberated jiva, the moksha, the jiva in moksha, who is called a mukta, once he leaves this material world and goes to the nitya vibhuti, paramapada, or Sri Vaikuntham, right? He has attributive knowledge of everything. The jivas which are innumerable, belong to different classes, 3 classes. Okay, so they are nityas or nityasuris, those who eternally have never been caught in samsara, never been caught in this material world, and who have from eternity been enjoying the bliss, complete bliss, supreme bliss in the supreme abode. That's the first category. The second category is the muktas, those who were here in this material world and who have attained moksha or liberation, right? The muktas are souls who have attained liberation through bhakti and prapati, right? Through different methods, right? So these are the 2 methods that are described here, Bhakti Yoga and prapati, right? Surrender or devotional yoga. The badas, the bound, those who are bound, are those who are not liberated from the transmigratory existence due to their avidya or ignorance and their karma, which is the effects of their actions, both good and bad, punya and papa, right? In previous births, they are bound to this world. Even good karma binds you to this material world. So good actions, bad actions, whatever the actions are, is a result from those actions, which is carried to the next birth and which fructifies after some time. So after the moment of giving up the body, right? When the body dies and the jiva is released from the body, the jiva which has attained to the knowledge of Brahman, so that jiva which understands the knowledge of Brahman, who has realized the knowledge of Brahman, right, issues out of the body through an aperture in the crown of the head, right? Through an aperture in the crown of the head, which is usually called the Brahmarandra. This is explained in the Yoga Shastras, and even in Panchavatra, there's an idea of how this happens, and moves upwards through the rays of the sun, which is, that's a poetic way of saying it. The term in Sanskrit is the Achirati Marga. There is a particular path which the jiva takes to go to the spiritual world. The released soul ultimately reaches the supreme goal, the Paramapada or Sri Vaikuntham, and enjoys complete bliss, ananda, right, forever, being established in the communion with God, right, in a relationship with Ishvara or the Supreme Person, Sriman Narayana. Moksha is essentially of the nature of sayujya, right? Sayujya or communion. Sayujya means communion, means close, very close relationship with the Supreme, right? Sayujya does not mean merging into the Supreme, right? There is no idea of merging into the Supreme in the system of Vishishtadvaita. There is an idea of Kaivalya. Kaivalya is isolation, where one experiences the bliss of the soul, but without an active relationship, without experiencing an active relationship with Ishvara. That is a possible form of liberation, which is not considered to be a high form of liberation. It's not considered to be the best type of liberation, not the one which is aspired to by by Vaishnavas, but it may be explained there in the scriptures in the Vedas, so therefore it can be accepted. It is accepted by the Bodhisattvas and Tengalis in slightly different ways. The Kaivalya Moksha. Kaivalya Moksha for Tengalis is an eternal state within Nitya Vibhuti, within Paramapada, but by Bodhisattvas it's considered to be either a temporary or eternal state, but it's not within Sri Vaikuntha. Anyway, there's a little bit of differentiation on this point. But in any case, Sayuja doesn't mean merging into the Supreme, it means communion, right? We have in the Narayana Upanishad, Narayana Sayujam Avapnoti, Sriman Narayana Sayujam Avapnoti, Evam Veda, at the end of Narayana Upanishad. So we understand that by chanting the Astakshara mantra, we're going to go to Sriman Narayana and we're going to enjoy close communion with him and service unto him, right? And complete knowledge and bliss in that situation. But that does not mean, Sayuja does not mean merging into him. And so moksha is essentially of the nature of Sayuja and not Salokya, Sarupya, and Samipya, right? So there are these other types of mokshas which are considered there in the Shastras. Even in the Bhagavatam, there's a verse which talks about the 4 S's, Sayuja, Salokya, Sarupya, and Samipya types of mukti, right? There may also be another one, I'm not quite sure, but we have to look it up, Sharshti. But anyway, there is Salokya means being in the same place. Samipya means similar. Samipya means intimacy, being very intimately connected to the Lord. And Sarupya means having a similar bodily features as the Lord. Moksha is normally considered to be Sayuja, or means very close communion with the Lord, serving the Lord. So Ishvara, again about Ishvara, about the Supreme Lord, right? The relation of Ishvara to Chit and Achit, Chit meaning the souls, the individual souls, and Achit meaning the material nature, or what we just described above as Prakriti, right? Has already been mentioned. So we already understand the relationship. Again, what the relationship is conceived of is, the analogy given is that the souls and the world are like the body of God, right? And God is like the sharirin, or the owner and controller and supporter of the body, right? The soul. And the souls are like the sharira, the body itself, the souls and the material nature. He is the controller, niyanta, right? And the principal sheshin, or the master, right, of all. The worshipped in every act. So every act that we do is actually worshiping the Lord. The bestower of all fruits. So all reactions, all karma, all fruits, whether they're material or spiritual, they're all bestowed by the Lord. He's the sustainer of all and the supreme cause of all effects, while Chit and Achit are his modes or his attributes and subsidiaries or his servants, sheshas, right? The control. So everything serves him. All the sentient souls serve him, right? They're of the essence of servants, and also even material elements. The material elements are also serving him. They're serving his purpose. While Chit and Achit are his modes or attributes and his subsidiaries or servants, the controlled and the supported, right? While since consciousness presupposes a conscious self, right? So if we think about consciousness, if we accept consciousness as a reality, right? Consciousness means that there is a self that is conscious, right? The reality is not identical with consciousness, right? Hence, Ishvara, or God, is not pure, non-differentiated being, nor pure consciousness, but the highest self, characterized essentially by consciousness and unsurpassable ananda or bliss. He is the sole cause of the universe, since he comprehends it within himself in latent form prior to creation, right? He's the one who wills it. It's why his Satya Sankalpa, his eternal divine will, that material nature and the souls are created, right? Prior to creation, and then by his will manifests what is latent. Just like we think and we feel and we will something to happen like that. So similarly, the Supreme Lord also does like that. The conception of God as a supreme person and creator raises the following question. How can the supreme being be eternally perfect if he manifests himself as the world? The world is imperfect. There are many imperfections in the world. And we have the Bada Jivas who are covered by avidya or ignorance. We have the living beings here who are suffering because of their ignorance, and their bliss and their knowledge is covered like that. So how can the supreme person who manifests this imperfection in this material world, right? How can that person be considered perfect because he's manifesting something which is imperfect, right? Will not the imperfections of the world adhere or stick to the perfect being also, right? So that's a question. The question is, how do we solve this problem? Because this is a problem in philosophy in general, that we think, okay, God is perfect, but this world is not perfect, and this world was created by God, so this world came out of it, and we essentially accept that the cause and the effect are the same. From the effect being this world and the souls, right? From God comes the effect of the souls in the world. The souls in the world are imperfect in this world, right? And therefore, something imperfect comes from the perfect, but therefore, doesn't that mean that the perfect is also imperfect in some way, right? That's the question. So Vishishtadvaita attempts to solve this problem by its doctrine of Sharira Shariri Sambandha, or the relationship between the world and Brahman or the Supreme, Srimanarayana, as body and soul. Brahman has the world of life and matter for his body, right? The Supreme Brahman, Srimanarayana, has the world of life, or the jivas, right, and matter as his body, and constitutes the universal self. He is the universal soul of that body, consisting of the souls and the individual souls and matter, the world, the universe. The world body has two states. It has karna and karya. Karna is the causal state, and karna is the affected state, right? Just like we were talking about latent, it is latent within the world, and then it becomes expressed when the latent will of the Lord to create becomes expressed when the creation becomes created, and as the cause becomes the effect. And the causal, okay, so there are two: karna, meaning causal, and karya, meaning affected, the nature of which are contraction and expansion. So the world body in the karna, or the causal aspect, is contracted and then expands. These states belong to the world body of Brahman alone, and not to Brahman himself, right? So Brahman himself, or the Supreme Personality, Srimanarayana, is never contracted and expanded. He isn't contracted or expanded. But because he creates the world exists in two different forms. It exists in latent form when it's contracted, and then later as an effect, it is an expanded form, right? So it exists in these two different forms. Expansion is evolution, and contraction is involution. So after expansion, there can be contraction again at the pralaya, at a dissolution. As time goes on and the cycle of time goes on, there may be an expansion or contraction of the world and the souls, right? Brahman becomes or manifests the world in the sense that he evolves the body, which is his attribute. So the body of the world and the souls are his attribute. They're an attribute of his, and that attribute evolves. Not that the essence, right? Not that the essence of reality is in a state of flux, right? So remember, there's substantive and there's attributive, right? So the substance, the thing, God, right? The substance, God, doesn't change, but his attribute changes. His attribute is, therefore, the world and the souls. They're his attributes, right? So because we have this understanding of Sharira Shariri, of the body-soul relationship between God and his attributes, the souls and the world, right? Because they're attributes, the attributes can change, whereas the substance, God, never changes. Does that make sense? So, not that the essence of reality is in a state of flux. It's not. The essence of reality, or God, Ishvara, doesn't change. The notion of the Supreme Person, whose attribute only is in a state of manifestation, makes the divine being the substantive element, the ground of all existence. So he is the underlying substance, and the effect, this universe of the souls, are his attributes, and the attributes can go through different changes. The entire process of evolution is in the form in which Ishvara manifests himself in and through the world body, right, is an opportunity given the jivas to attain a life of perfection and communion with the Supreme, right? So the whole reason for doing this is to give an opportunity to the fallen jivas, the buddha jivas, the covered jivas, the ignorant and non-blissful bound souls in this world, to attain a life of perfection and communion, right, and eternal service to the Supreme, Sriman Narayana. Though this view of evolution attributes to the divine being a transcendent activity, he, as the Antaryamin, or the Paramatman, the super soul, the soul, the aspect of Sriman Narayana that accompanies each one of the souls in every body in this world, reveals his nature in the entire process of evolution and human history. This imparts a unique value to the religious experience of all individuals in their intellectual, moral, and psychic levels. The imperfections clinging to the body do not affect the universal self, right? And the transcendental attributes of the universal self do not pervade the body, right? So there's a distinction between the world and the souls as the world body and God, which we previously said he's the substance and we're the attribute, right? It is just like infancy, youth, old age, and other bodily manifestations, which are not the attributes of the jivas, but belong to the body, right? So just in the same way, right, the soul in the body, right, the individual soul in the body doesn't go through childhood, youthhood, maturity, old age, doesn't go through those stages. The soul is always the same, right? That's very, right? That's stated in the Bhagavad Gita also, Deheno Shrinyata Dehe Komaram Yomaram Jara, right? The soul doesn't go through those changes. What goes through those changes is the body, right? So our body, we have this experience that our body goes through those changes. We were young one time, we were an infant, now we're older, but the soul is the same. The soul is the same and the soul hasn't changed. So similarly, the Lord, being the soul of the world body, which is made up of the universe and the individual souls, right? He doesn't change, right? Which are the attributes of the jivas, but belong to the body, while pleasure, pain, etc., belong only to the knowing self and not to the body, right? Thus, the relation of sharira sharirin absolves the reality of the Supreme Person, right, of having even the shadow of evil, right? So no imperfection touches Supreme Person, Sriman Narayana, because he is the soul, he's the substance, and we're the attributes. Only the attributes change, right? So though Vishishta Dvaita conceives the reality, or the Supreme Person, Sriman Narayana, as qualified by the realms of Chit and Achit, he's qualified by the realms of Chit and Achit, or the souls and matter. These modes do not constitute the whole of reality. These attributes, they don't consist of the whole of reality. There's something else beyond that, something else beyond the universe and the souls, right? Which is the Supreme. For the realms of Chit and Achit, this material world, right, which as existence are real, are not identified with Ishvara or God, who is the self-conscious being and the substratum of everything. He's the substance behind all the attributes, right? The view of reality as Adara, and Niyanta means supporter and leader or controller, right? Not only gives a glimpse of the nature of the Supreme Being, but also suggests the personal nature of the divine, right? Just as the soul is the person, is a personality, is an individual. Similarly, the soul of this world body, of this universe, is also an individual, is also a person, right? So the Vishishtadvaita conception of deity, of the divine, right, Srimanarayana, must be sharply distinguished from pantheism on the one hand and anthropomorphism on the other hand. So pantheism means where it's not just that we conceive of in Vishishtadvaita that God is there within different things, the God in the rock, the God in the river, the God in the mountain, like that. It's not an impersonal sort of idea like that. He has his specific personality separate from that, right? He's an individual which is separate from his all pervasive nature. And anthropomorphism, it's not that we've created God in the image of man, that we see, human beings around us, and therefore we anthropomorphize man, right? But it is, so it's not anthropomorphized either, because we understand that God has this nature. So, is there no room for pantheism since there is no room for pantheism since the reality, the Supreme Lord, Srimanarayana, in spite of being the Antaryamin or the super soul, the indweller in all, is looked upon as Narayana, Srimanarayana, right? Concrete and endowed with consciousness and super individuality, right? Likewise, any sort of anthropomorphism is out of place, since the Supreme Being is thought of as possessing 6 attributes: Jnana, Aishwarya, Shakti, Bala, Virya, Tejas, right? In complete perfect form. Besides the infinite auspicious qualities of love, mercy, kindness, etc., which transcend the ordinary qualities of human personality. Though very often the view has been expressed that Hinduism possesses no elements of theism, Vishishtadvaita offers a theistic ideal which affirms the existence of the Supreme Person and consistently interprets our experience as a whole so as to account for the oneness of the world. Ishvara, or the Supreme Person, or God, Srimanarayana, is an actual existent reality who embraces and comprehends all individual selves and the worlds of matter, not as not as isolated entities, but as intimately related to one another in an organic manner, and thus forming a perfect, coherent unity, right? It's a very holistic system. They have no existence apart from him, right? The world and the souls. In and through him, in and through his life and matter, life and matter have meaning and significance, right? So that's a little bit of an overview of Yatindramata Dipika given in the introduction here. And now we're going to hear a little bit about the author and this work, right? So this compendium, or this work, entitled Yatindramata Dipika, is one of the most favorite works amongst the students of Vishishtadvaita. If the writings of Sri Vedanta Deshika, the great exponent of Vishishtadvaita, are grand and imposing in diction and presentation, this little work is simple, lucid, and full of meaning. As a compendious presentation of the epistemology, remember, epistemology is the system by which we know what we know to be real, right? It's a system of knowing. right? Psychology and cosmology of Vishishtadvaita, this manual may be said to have no parallel among the works in its class in the system, of its class in the system. So it's very short, it's very succinct, and it deals with all these points. Srinivasa, the person who is the author, right, of this standard manual, seems to have been a resident of the holy place Tirupati, which again is in Andhra Pradesh, where the Tirumala temple is on top of the Tirumala hill of Lord Venkateshwara. Now a township in the Chittoor district of the Presidency of Madras. When this was written, that area was called the Presidency of Madras, now called Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. It is clear from the colophon of this work, okay, so the colophon is sometimes when manuscripts are being written, right, there's a part on the manuscript where the person writes that I copied this manuscript, and I wrote that the author's name is this and the date when it was copied is this, and that part is like a footnote which is written on the manuscript. So the colophon of the work, right, says that he was the son of one Swami Pushkarini Govindacharya, right? So this Srinivasa was the son of Swami Pushkarini Govindacharya, a devotee of Sri Venkatesha, right, Lord Venkateshwara Balaji, and a disciple of Mahacharya of Vadula Gotra. This Mahacharya or Maharya is identified with Dodayacharya of the Kandala Vadula Gotra. Mahacharya ranks with the great exponents of Vishishtadvaita philosophy. And remember, this was at the beginning of the 17th century, so in the early 1600s. He wrote a famous commentary named Chandamaruta on Vedanta Deshika's Shatadusani. So Shatadusani is a work by Vedanta Deshika, and this Mahacharya wrote a commentary on that called Chandamaruta, which exhibits his genius and originality as a thinker. Apart from Chandamaruta, he has, to his credit, more than 7 works, most of which have not been printed. Some of these are Advaita Vidya Vijaya, Brahma Sutra Bhashya Upanyasa, Parikara Vijaya, Parasharya Vijaya, Brahma Vidya Vijaya, Vedanta Vijaya, and Sadvidya Vijaya. Now, all of these, a lot of these works have the word Vijaya at the end, meaning victory, right? And so a lot of them are written to counteract other works which were written by the Advaitins or the monists at that time. And so he was a great debater against these different monists. And in fact, we'll read, maybe if we go through the introduction of Alkondavili Govindacharya in the other edition of Yatindramata Dipika, he describes how this Mahacharya, or his other name was Dodayacharya of Kandala Vadula Gotra, right, who was a great exponent, actually was a contemporary of Appaya Dikshita, who was a very famous Advaitin or a Shaivite Advaitin, right? Now, Shaivite and Advaitin are not necessarily synonymous. We don't always have people who are Advaitins, worshippers of Shiva. They can worship any deity as supreme. But Appaya Dikshita is a very famous author of Advaita literature, and he used to, this person who is the Acharya of Srinivasa, the author of Yatindramata Dipika, used to dispute with Appaya Dikshita. So obviously he's written a lot of these books here, destroying the arguments of the Advaitins over the Vishishtadvaitin ideas. According to Govindacharya Swamin, right, who is the author of the other English version of Yatindramata Dipika, when he says Govindacharya Swamin, he means Alkondavili Govindacharya of Mysore. Mahacharya was a friend and contemporary, and here it goes, see, it says, Mahacharya was a friend and contemporary of Appaya Dikshita, one of the greatest scholars of his time. Mr. M.T. Narasimha Iyer thinks that he had a controversy with Dikshita on the philological significance of the word Narayana. Okay. Dikshita, right, Apaya Dikshita, is generally placed between 1520 and 1593 AD. So Mahacharya might have lived towards the end of the 16th or the beginning of the 17th century, which places our author, Srinivasa, as his disciple somewhere at the end of the 16th or the beginning of the 17th century. So, now, in this connection, it'd be worth noting that Dharmaraja Advarin, the celebrated author of Vedanta Paribhasha, right, also lived in the 17th century. It appears that Srinivasa was aware of his senior contemporary's work, as he, in some places, quotes the very words of Dharmaraja, right? So, while presenting the prima facie views of Advaita. So, as we say, we were discussing about syllogisms, which means in Vedanta, normally what happens is we have what's called the Purva Paksha. The initial argument or the initial question is given by the opponent, and then the person gives the proofs for or against the argument or the statement, and finally we get the Siddhanta. So we have Purva Paksha. We have for instance, we have a question or a statement. Then we have the Purva Paksha, which is called the prima facie view, the initial view. The initial view here in most Sri Vaishnava books, the initial view is going to be of the Advaitin or the Buddhist, right? Is going to give the initial view, and then the Siddhanta or the perfect answer is going to be given by the author of the book. So this Dharmaraja wrote a book like that, and these other books by Mahacharya, the guru of Srinivas, seem to be also like that, because they seem to be books which are written to conquer the views of the Advaitins. So while Dharmaraja calls his work Vedanta Paribhasha, Srinivasa names his Shariraka Paribhasha, right? So Srinivasa was a direct descendant in a long line of Sri Vaishnava apostles. His immediate preceptor Mahacharya and other Mahacharyas of the same line, who were domiciled in Chola Simhapuram, right, trace their ancestry to Dasarathi. So they can all be traced back to Dasarathi, the nephew of Sri Ramanuja. So was also a great disciple of Ramanuja. So our author had the benefit of the traditional teachings so valued in the Guru Parampara of the Sri Vaishnavas. Srinivasa had no pretensions to originality, since he, at the beginning of his work, acknowledges his indebtedness to the former acharyas, beginning with Bhagavan Bodhayana, who we discussed I'm sure we discussed. Bodhayana was the Vrittikara, or the commentator on Brahma Sutras, that even came much before Ramanuja, and Ramanuja went to Kashmir and consulted the Bodhayana Vritti before writing his Srivasya. So he mentions the former acharyas and is indebted to them. Srinivas is indebted to them from Bodhayana all the way to his immediate guru, Mahacharya. So the whole Guru Parampara. In the epilogue, also he gives a long list of ancient works from which he has drawn upon. So he has a bibliography that he gives at the end of his Yatindramata Dipika, showing all the places, all the different ancient works that he's got his information from. The list starts with Dramita Bhashya, right? Dramita Bhashya, and ends with Parasharya Vijaya, which was listed above which is a work of Mahacharya, his immediate guru. This suggests that the famous Dramita Bhashya was available as late as the 17th century. So now it's not late. Okay, so that is the end of the introduction to Yatindramata Dipika, right? And we have a table of contents here describing in detail all the different aspects that we just talked about. And then next time, what we'll do is we'll start to discuss the actual text itself, or we may look at the introduction, which is very interesting, of the other edition, Alkondavili Govindacharya's, before we enter into a discussion of the text itself. So let's see. Yeah, here we are. So here it starts. This is where it starts. Right. So we'll just stop here for a second. And does anybody have any questions or comments about the introduction to Yatindramata Dipika, or any of the subject matters that we covered in these two introductory talks?
No, Swami, it's a really detailed introduction, and it's amazing how every single point is laid out so nicely. And the nice thing is that you explain each word over and over and over again, and I really, really appreciate that. So more of an appreciation. So it is something to definitely go over. It's not something that can easily soak into my Kali Yuga brain very easily. But if one learns all those terminologies, then at least, you learn the jargon and be able to,
right,
understand a lot of the things.
This is the idea. This is the idea, is that later on, when you study some other texts like Srivastava or whatever it is, like that, you'll understand the terminology. And when somebody says Adaya, Adarya, Vyapti, Pratyaksha, Anumana, Shabda, when somebody talks about Sharirin, Sheshin, Shesha, Sheshi, or whatever, when somebody talks about the Tanmatras or the Shuddha, right? All of these terminologies will be used, right? And so the idea is to get familiar with the terminology. Then you can understand it. You can understand anything.
Yeah,
so
because actually,
great way to get familiar with it.
Because actually, those terminologies in any Sri Vaishnava writing, they use all these terminologies, without any explanation. They use all these Sanskritized jargon, without any explanation.
Not just Sanskrit,
really
Tamil. Sanskrit, Tamil. There's so much. There's so many different jargon that you have to get used to when understanding.
Yeah, so that really helps to understand a lot of this. That makes sense.